So last time we were talking about the topic of Agile coaching. We got through the paths to being an Agile coach. We got through the theory of preconceived notions that you bring with you depending on your career entry into Agile coaching / Scrum Mastery, right? We had a little theory about that. We talked a little bit about where you should be placed inside of the organization. And then we talked a bit about Agile coaching at the enterprise level. So those are the high-level topics that we talked about last time. So this time, we have a few topics left over that we're going to touch and hit on in order to get through like all the rest of the content for coaching. Hopefully. I don't see this going into 3 times.
All right, so where do we begin?
Where do we begin? I like starting with the question of, as a coach, well, as a Scrum Master, right, or coach, could be either one. If you're with a team and you observe something that you want to talk about, or you want to step in, you want to critique something in the middle of when you see it, right? There is a thing in coaching of, should I step in or should I wait until something happens and let whatever's going to happen, and then at the end of it, then I'll bring it up to the person or to the group. But should I interrupt what's happening and step in?
Right.
Or should I leave it alone? That is one of those, like, it depends, kind of feel out the moment situation that nobody really has a good answer to. So let's kick it off with that one.
Yeah, I love that question. So I think, I'm going to say the same thing that you just said. There is no one answer to that because it is contextual. Yeah. If you're talking about Agile coaching, and your team is quite mature, you might just want to hold your thoughts back a bit and let them air out their voices until they land at something. But on the other hand, if your team is not very mature or they're not very outspoken, because we see that all the time, people just don't speak for some reason, then you might want to tee something up for them. But rather than say, how about this, I usually say, what I found has worked in a team I worked with in the past is this. It may or may not work for us. What do you think? And then see who bites. But if you're talking about coaching beyond the Agile realm, professional coaching, then absolutely they say, don't lead with solutions, right? Let the client or the coachee arrive at their own solution and just keep asking them open-ended questions. But assuming we're talking about Agile coaching here, what I found works really well is pick somebody, and to the extent you could actually even pick anybody, but you could turn to somebody who really is very quiet in your team usually, and just say, Mary, what do you think of this? Or Thomas, what do you think of this? Yeah. Right? It brings them out because you're asking them the question, so it brings them out. But you also want to establish an environment where they don't feel like they're going to be reprimanded for failing because you're not really judging them. You want them to air their opinion without fear of judgment. So you'd say, you tee it up as, there's no right or wrong answer to this, but what are your thoughts on this? Right? We'll decide as a team and we'll start with you. So that way you're bringing them into the conversation and see how that goes. You have to guard against those people that are usually very outspoken, because those guys tend to anchor the conversation. Yeah. And sometimes they're very eager, like they will just drop into, the middle of it. And often what I found helps is, just say that's great, right? Just hold that thought for a second. We'll get back to that. And be perfectly honest, I may or may not get back to that because we run out of time sometimes, right? Yeah. So, you just don't want to say to anybody that their thoughts aren't welcome, but those that are anchoring the conversation, you want to make sure that they allow the others to speak up.
I want to stick with when you should. The logical move here is when not to step in. Like, are there obvious places not to step in? But you also brought something up that was interesting, because I was asked a question recently by someone, which is, if you have quiet team members or team members that you see during meetings or whatever that are being quiet, what can you do to bring them, or what would you do in that instance? I mean, my answer is kind of standoffish, which is like, well, sometimes you just have quiet team members. That might be okay. They might be thinking about how they're going to deal with stuff, and they might not be okay in a group setting. But there may not be a reason. It depends on the setting. My answer in that case was, it depends on the setting. If it's just a meeting of the team, like let's think about a team, like a development team. Like I'm thinking like 6 people or whatever on a daily scrum or a sprint planning or something like that. It's just the normal team, right? That's one venue. But I've been in other venues where it's like a scaled program level sprint review where it's like 4 teams together. And it was like 30, somewhere between 30 and 50 people on the call. And some team members are there because they may be called on in the presentation, but they just stay completely silent. And in that kind of venue, I can't. Why would I? Unless they specifically, I know they have something to bring into the conversation. I don't even know if I would call on them.
You often don't know that they have something to contribute. I mean, these tend to be somewhat junior folks, right?
Yeah,
and they feel like it's not their place to say anything because they feel intimidated with 30 other people or 40 other people on the call. But for precisely that reason, I would occasionally call people out and just ask them. And you'd say, what do you have to say about this? And more often than not, they just say nothing, or they may say something, but you want to encourage them to say something, because if you don't actively bring them into the conversation, they never will. And it sets a precedence. The first time you don't bring them in, that they're not going to say anything because their leads are there, etc., or leadership's there, maybe, right? Whoever else is there. So I think it's good to call on them, to encourage them to say something, but set that environment up, like a safe environment. Just say, we're not making a decision here, we're just simply brainstorming, right? So they feel safe at saying something. And to that point, lead by example. So tee something up, right, is that concept I call, prop it up so they can knock it down. Yeah. So just say something absolutely ridiculous yourself. I'm serious. Like, it doesn't make sense in the context, right? But just say it anyway and just say, well, what about this? And someone says that doesn't make sense. You say, oh, yeah, I see why. Now, what do you think? And then turn to that person who doesn't say anything, right? And you say, what are your thoughts? But you're not inviting their thoughts on your ridiculous proposal. Yeah. You're inviting their thoughts on the problem at hand. Yeah. But that's kind of like a lead into how to do that. I've had some luck with that, where people would say something because they feel at ease to say something, right? They say, well, it couldn't be as bad as, what this guy just said, right? So, yeah.
I want to return back to the other question because I feel like I'm going to forget it if I don't. But the other side of that is, if you do have experienced team members that are not saying anything. When I was at a very large organization, I worked with a vendor team that was kind of behind a team lead. They were an offshore Indian team, and their team lead was a Indian guy, but he was here. He was physically here, but his whole team was remote in India. And the team would wait for him to say something before they would give their input, because they would kind of see how he was leaning before they would say anything, because they didn't want to be put in a position where they were saying something opposite to him. So in that instance, they weren't saying anything because they were first trying to see which way the wind was blowing.
Well, I think there's a little bit more to that than that. You're right. Often that is the case as well. But I think, overarching is the fact that it is very much a cultural thing where they don't speak up when they're the subordinate and the supervisor is there in the room. Mm-hmm. It's yielding to your superior, basically, right? And speaking up may be misconstrued, in brackets, as questioning authority. Mm-hmm. So they don't say anything. Mm-hmm. They keep their head down, basically. Which is why when that situation is prevalent, and it's happening or it's about to happen because this tech lead is onshore and so on, I would work with that tech lead ahead of the meeting and just say, hey, listen, I'll call on you. Your input's very valuable, but it might not be till the end because we want to hear from everybody, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I read something recently. I wish I could remember where it was. I read something recently about the advantage that Japanese firms do, which is they have the least senior person in the room speak first, and then they go basically up in seniority until they get to the most senior person when they talk about different points or considerations or decisions or whatever points they're talking about. And that's just the standard procedure that they use in order to make sure that all opinions are out on the table. Because otherwise they know that everyone would just stay quiet and wait for the senior person to,
Yeah.
showcase their opinion, and then just kind of fall in line behind it, stay silent.
Which really stifles innovation, right?
Right. Well, that was the. I really wish I could remember. That was the article. Basically, was talking about innovation and why. Maybe it was in that NUMMI article. Maybe it was something I read off of that NUMMI article that we showcased a while ago, of why the American companies couldn't compete with the Japanese manufacturing companies. They just had all these methods in place. Anyway, the other side of this is: are there any situations where you know that you should not step in to make it a coaching moment, that you should just leave it alone and let things resolve itself, and then maybe later afterwards, bring it up one-on-one or bring it up with the team later in private?
Yeah, there are a couple of different situations. So first of all, if the conversation is between, let's say, developers or tech leads or architects, and it's a very technical conversation, there are a couple of different points of view that are being debated. You really don't want to weigh in on any side, right? You want everything to shake out. And so that's where I would sit back. I would even say, even though I understand what they're saying, I would just say that this is really beyond me. So I'm going to let you guys discuss this. Yeah. Just do it respectfully or whatever. And that's it. Step back and don't weigh in. Mm-hmm. You can see from the conversation that one of the approaches might lead into a cul-de-sac or some issues with maybe, say, scalability or performance or whatever. But that is not the time to say it. You want them to kind of go through the motions of debating everything and then interject and say, now, which one of these two approaches will avoid the issue of, scalability, let's say, right? Performance bottlenecks or whatever issue it is that you think might be coming to a head here with one of the options, and let them again debate that. And automatically, through the natural order of things, you'll find that they'll arrive at a conclusion that is correct. So that's one example. Mm-hmm. The other example, when not to say something, is the other side of that, which is, I really do not understand what the heck they're talking about. And I just want to stay out of it, right? Yeah. So because it's over my head. And all I'm looking for now is just a civil discourse and make sure everyone's voices are heard. And then they are arriving at a natural conclusion, right? Not one that is kind of led by a headstrong person or something like that. But those are the two cases.
Yeah, I think the only time that I default to not stepping in. Like maybe it's, and maybe people that have worked with me in the past would say like, we were expecting Brian to step in, but he never did. Where a decision was reached, but maybe they didn't like that it was, it took 45 minutes to get to the decision, where they expect if I were to jump in and be a better facilitator, it should have taken 10 minutes or something like that kind of expectation. They're expecting me to be a more active facilitator in the meeting.
So I would say you actually were being a good facilitator by not jumping in. It depends on the context, right? Yeah,
it depends.
Sometimes what happens is if a team is not very mature in their agile journey, then you may want to step in. And you're not really at that point coaching so much as mentoring, right? You're saying, this is what you found works in your experience. Mm-hmm. Have you considered that team, right? It's kind of gently nudging them in that direction. But if the team is fully mature or on their way there, you want to let them work it out by themselves. And that is doing the right thing, in my opinion, right?
Usually where I felt that scrutiny has never really been inside of a team. It's always been when multiple teams meet, and I have just facilitated the meeting of multiple teams. And maybe it'd be like a lead or, 2-3 different, or maybe a different department my team is meeting with to try to figure out something that there's dependencies or something that they're working on for the first time, and it's obvious that nobody has a shared understanding, so they're kind of working it out. And like I said, I'm 100% okay letting the teams figure out how to work together, where it's obvious that I could be kind of helping move things forward, but I'm just kind of hanging back.
I've come across situations in that kind of scenario where you have multiple teams, mm-hmm. and in the back of your mind you're thinking, this team's making a valid point, this team's making a valid point,
right?
But they're not reaching any kind of a conclusion, right? So I think in those cases, it's perfectly valid to say, okay, there's been some really good discussions, summarize it, right, the salient points, and then just say, let's just sleep on it, right? Let's not make the decision now. We'll come back together again with the benefit of having noodled on it for a while and then see if somebody has a different take on it. That way, neither team feels like they were robbed of their voice, right? Yeah. And also, you're not rushing to a decision just for the sake of arriving at a decision.
Mm-hmm. You know, I just thought about something when you were talking, which is I don't like to step in. Honestly, as a facilitator, I don't like. I'm probably a terrible facilitator, quite honestly, compared to some other Scrum Masters I've been with, because I don't like to step in at all. I like the team to figure out. I like the developers to figure out how to work with other developers. That's what I'm looking for at the end of the meeting. That's the objective, the outcome, the goal, or whatever that I'm looking for at the end of the meeting. Is these developers learn how to work with each other, and they don't really need anybody else in the middle of it. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
However, when things get contentious, or when other people interject and are cutting people off and that kind of stuff, then I will step in as a facilitator. That's almost the only time that I will step in as a facilitator.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm kind of similar. When I step in that scenario, though, as a facilitator, it's never to weigh in on one side or the other, right? So, it's always to say, we're not really getting anywhere here.
Yeah.
Why don't we take a break?
Yeah.
Right? Let's just come back again later today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. To reiterate the goal, or to kind of
let cooler heads prevail. Basically.
Reset. You hit the reset switch. Yeah.
Right,
I understand.
right.
I understand. I mean, the only that's probably about the only time that I would step in is some malfunction is happening, and you need to get it back on track. I'm really not very concerned about it. And like I said, I've gotten this feedback before, so it's not a surprise. It's just my personal style. I want the development teams to learn how to work with other development teams. I think they should have that skill.
Yeah, fully agree.
If you're just asking me to be a high-powered business analyst, get in the meeting and be like, what do you think we should do? What do you think we should do? I'm going to make a list, and then we're all going to talk about the list, and then we're going to agree on the list. And at that point, you're not really getting collaboration. I mean, I guess you kind of are, but it's kind of like a forced collaboration.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, I agree with that. I think that's not real collaboration. People are just going along with it.
Not. And then those two teams need me in the future whenever they talk to each other.
Right.
You're not really building relationships out of that, I don't know. When to step in and when to stay out of it is a very interesting conversation for me. I like having those conversations.
It's a great conversation. I think in my journey when I first started, I found myself stepping in way more often. But as I matured, I learned the benefits of not stepping in, because if you think back after the meeting, because you didn't step in, the logical conclusion they reached was far superior, right? Because everybody had their say and aired out all different aspects of whatever it is that they were discussing, right?
Yeah.
So
well, that's one of those things that it benefits them. It doesn't necessarily benefit you. I mean, you as a coach in that instance, you don't necessarily learn anything from kind of like staying back, observing things. I guess you learn about their personalities or whatever. Or you learn where to take it offline and to coach one-on-one to make future interactions better. Maybe you can make that case, but the logical argument to this is it would be a lot more efficient if you just stepped in and told them, I need you to do this, I need this from you, and I need this from you. Efficient, not not better. It would just be more efficient to do this and just tell people what you need. To step in with that command and control. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the argument to someone screaming at their monitor right now.
Oh, it would be efficient but not effective, right? That's what I
agree.
say.
Like you're not going to leave the team with any skills that they didn't have when they walked into it.
The side effect, kind of a bad side effect, I guess, of stepping in, is that you're not really helping. You're actually deterring the team from becoming self-managing.
Right.
Because to your point, they're going to need you.
They're going to rely on you.
Which is horrible.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Like it takes a certain set of skills to stay out of an interaction that you see unfolding in front of you, to stay out of it, especially when you're in that Scrum Master role. Or a product owner, whatever it is, where people are going to be asking you about later. Just stay out of it and let the teams together work it out.
You have to constantly work on that, I believe, on those facilitation skills, because all too often you see Scrum Masters, product owners even, become more like taskmasters,
Right.
especially Scrum Masters. It just reporting on statuses and things like that, right? As opposed to letting the team figure out what they need to do.
Yeah. Usually what I do is I'll stay out of it. Again, unless it becomes contentious, then I'll step in. But usually what happens is if I see something or somebody says something, what I will do is I'll make a note to myself, and then when the meeting is over, I will meet with people one-on-one, or, obviously, like we were talking about people staying out, like people that they have something to contribute, but they're not contributing in the conversation. What I will do is I'll stay out of the larger group session. I'm trying not to call anybody out in front of a crowd, right? Because that's just not a great way to build a relationship in my experience anyway. And then what I'll do is I'll revisit it one-on-one, hopefully as close to the close of the meeting as possible. Revisit it one-on-one. Hey, when we were in this meeting, you said X, Y, Z. I think maybe you really meant this. How did you intend? Or hey, I saw you getting more upset when we talked about this. You want to talk about it? What do you think should have happened? Hey, this was the outcome of the meeting. I felt that you were agitated by the outcome of the meeting. What do you think should have happened? Hey, we made this decision. How do you think we should have gone about it? I feel that when I'm on a development team, that is the way I do all my coaching, is through one-on-ones. I do very little through group settings, and we get takeaways through retrospectives and stuff, but like one-on-ones, I feel is really where the power of coaching. When I'm in the role, that's where I exercise a lot of my power, is one-on-ones.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how you establish that safe zone, right? Yeah. Where people can feel free to speak up, because in a group setting they're not going to. And there's nothing you can do. Probably not.
I mean, like occasionally you'll get a team where they feel comfortable. It's a very small team. Like one time I was on a team that had like 3 people. Like the team was 3 people, and you could say anything in that team of 3 people. Like nobody was taking anything personally. Everyone worked together for many years. But I would say that was an exception rather than the rule. One-on-one coaching, that's probably the best way to give feedback to your team members as well, whereas maybe they don't get feedback. Maybe they only get feedback once a year with their yearly performance, whatever the company does. But it's nice to have someone kind of saying, hey, in this meeting you did whatever, and did you think about this, where were you coming from, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree fully. So there shouldn't be, in my opinion at least, scheduled events where people get feedback. It should just be ongoing as and when needed. Right? I firmly believe that. The other thing is, feedback shouldn't be like a one-time deal where you just give them a piece of feedback and you're done with it.
Right.
The person receiving the feedback should feel like they have an opportunity to do something about it.
Yeah.
And again, that opportunity should not be left open-ended, right? It should be like by a certain time, they will do something, change in some way to react to that feedback.
Yeah.
So circle back with them. And give them feedback on that and say, we talked about this 3 months ago, whatever it was, right? And I see you've improved on this, or you haven't, whichever way it goes. But follow through is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just becomes a paper exercise, one and done, right?
Yeah,
you don't want that.
Is there a time when it's, this is a question that I don't really know if it's even a relevant question. Is there a time when it's relevant versus not relevant to have a one-on-one feedback?
Yeah. So, excuse me. I was laughing.
I didn't mean to kill you with that question. Honestly, I have no idea.
No, that's a great question, though. And I was thinking about the time when I gave feedback and I shouldn't have.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I didn't know the person I was giving feedback to was on a downward path so much that they had already decided that they were going to leave.
Oh,
like
okay.
they'd thrown in the towel mentally. They'd checked out.
Yeah.
It was just a question of waiting out 2 weeks. So here I am, going through my spiel. I gave them the feedback, and they just said, at the end of it, they just said, yeah, this is great. I'm done. And I'm like, okay. Is there anything we can do? Nope. Because they were very good technically. Yeah. It's just that they'd had enough. And sometimes you just got to accept that, right? So that was the time. But how could I have known that? That's the thing. I was analyzing that situation and thought, no, I missed something. I missed a signal somewhere, a sign, where I missed that completely. And that's because, of course, they were very good at keeping it quiet. They'd already received an alternate offer, I guess, and decided to leave. And here I am thinking, let's give them a piece of feedback. And bad timing.
Yeah.
Couldn't have been avoided. I don't think it could have been avoided because I didn't find a trigger where I could have picked up on it. But yeah. The other time I think that's not a good time to give a piece of feedback is, when somebody has hit rock bottom and you want to give feedback on why they're there. I think you might just hold back a little bit, build them up a little bit off the bottom of the ocean floor, so to speak, and then give them feedback and say, you're on the way up. Let's just keep going. But what I'm telling you is, is useful because you don't want to find yourself hitting that bottom again.
Yeah.
But when they're at the bottom, that's not the time because that could be misconstrued again as you're just hitting them.
Yeah, I might add to that one. When something's out of line, I'll stop and I'll give them feedback in front of the group if something's obviously out of line. Like I had a. I mean, this probably wasn't appropriate feedback, but I'm me, so I had a team member. Who was in QA. And I had basically the equivalent of like a director of development yelling at her to be like, why are you asking about this requirement? It's so minor, you're wasting your time, And I, at the time, as a QA manager, I was like, no, nobody's wasting their time. I was like, if anybody's wasting their time, it's you in this meeting. The team can figure out how to do requirements. You need to roll your feedback back up and go to hell. I don't remember what I told him. I told him something that was not necessarily helpful. In any way, shape, or form, but no, it was just somebody using their position in the organization to basically shut down further conversation of technical details or whatever, because they just didn't think it was important and they thought their time was being wasted. But honestly, they probably shouldn't have been in that team meeting at the time. I don't really remember if it was. I think it was the equivalent of a sprint planning. I think that's what it was. I think it was like a sprint planning that somebody's boss happened to show up to. I think that's what it was, and they were just, running roughshod over the team at the time.
Yeah,
and
make those guys.
Yeah, and what I did at that point was when I saw other managers show up to a team's sprint planning, I, as a manager, would show up to the team's sprint planning as kind of a counterbalance. I can only imagine what would happen if I wasn't there. You would just have somebody Yeah,
they'd be steamrolling.
Yeah, steamrolling the team.
I would make those guys all optional for sprint planning, and then
usually they are optional. The problem is when the pressure is on in the organization, they show up to basically force the team to feel that pressure,
which really doesn't help. It actually hinders.
It's absolutely a negative, and at that point, I mean, that's the nice thing about having scrum masters or coaches not being aligned under the same hierarchy that developers work for, is that you can kind of shut those people down. You can kind of shut those topics down, and you can say, "Hey, you're not being helpful in the conversation." Maybe you ask them to leave. Maybe just kind of lobbing that out there and saying, "Hey, you're not being helpful," is enough for them to kind of catch it in their own self-awareness. Hopefully, in cases where it's not, then that's when you have. Hopefully, you can text your manager, but hey, we need you in this meeting room or whatever, and they can come in and fire back.
Yeah, just sometimes use the technique where you just say, can we just go through the agenda and then we'll get back to what you're saying, and the agenda just might end up filling the rest of the meeting. It happens.
What would you say if you had to give a one-liner? What would you say the purpose or the best use of a one-on-one is? What is the purpose of a one-on-one, or what is the outcome of the best use of a one-on-one? I don't know if that's a great question.
No, I think it's a great question. I'm trying to formulate an answer in one sentence, really. I think one-on-ones
we have all day.
One-on-ones are basically there for two reasons, right? One is for you to get feedback as a person who is, being asked on a one-on-one. But as a coach, it's for you to figure out some of the causes, right? What's really going on here? So you ask questions. So I think both of those are only fruitful if the environment's conducive, which goes back to that safe space.
Yep.
But so I think if I had to summarize all that, it's to get feedback and give feedback, knowing that no one else is judging you on what you're saying, which is, again, going back to that safe environment. It's critical to establish that. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you're looking for.
What else for coaching? I have this topic for coaching that I want to talk about, but I don't really know a good way to present it. which is there are coaches out there. We talked about it very, very, very briefly. I want to have a guest on just talk about this topic alone. I feel like it could be a whole podcast. The profession of coaching, I feel, has this thing where you see people out in the field who have put out like training videos, and they make their whole profession off of like memorizing little quips and little bits of Zen and pieces of expertise in coaching, versus actual people that have been, deployed at client sites or deployed with, at companies that have been coaches for X number of years. What I'm trying to say is there are people out there that can talk the talk, but if you actually deploy them, we did touch on this last time. Mm-hmm. I know we did. But if you actually deploy them to be a scaled Scrum Master or be a team Scrum Master, they would have a difficult time. Yeah, either because maybe they just don't have the experience to build a team up from scratch and help them along, or because they're so attached to the dogma they can't detach themselves to say, let me help this team figure out what's best for them. I'm just going to prescribe what the team needs, and if they don't catch on quickly, then I'm they just can't cut it.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes what I've seen, to your point, is really people that just haven't had that field experience. Mm-hmm. They may have read books or whatever it is, right? Right. And these are the people that have the need, they feel, to memorize these quips of, Zen, right? So, as you put it just doesn't feel like it comes across naturally to me.
All the books.
Yeah, all the books, yeah. So those people that have never read those books and it just comes naturally, those are the most effective coaches. You've got to be a catalyst. You should go into a session thinking you've got nothing to gain, nothing to lose, basically, right? If you have an agenda going in, you're not really coaching, because you'll somehow, maybe subconsciously, be working toward your agenda. It's in your mind. You need to get that out of there, and it's harder done than said, right?
Or you get the buy my product. Buy my training.
Yep. Here's a quick look at the free part, and now you got to subscribe.
That's right. Like and subscribe. Oh no. Oh no. Since we broke last time and I had some time to actually research, I came up with the stances that I was looking for last time that I was struggling to look for. It was the doctor, the expert, the pair of hands, and the coach. That was the IC Agile.
Right.
Four different stances of the coach, which for some reason was so weird. I couldn't find them all. Now I found stances of coaching that was like this times 2. So the other stances of coaching I found was mentor, teacher, lean leader, facilitator, change agent, counselor, coach, and consultant. So I found 2 different versions. All of these, doctor, expert, pair of hands, or whatever, are included in the other elements of a coach. So they're all kind of saying the same thing.
There's probably likely multiple other lists out there, right?
I think so.
I think the danger in any of these lists is people tend to compartmentalize these and say, either I'm at this or I'm at that, right? Whereas an effective coach wouldn't even have to think about which mode they're in. They would simply be seamlessly switching hats, so to speak, right? If you have to think about, am I mentoring or am I coaching now? You're not really being an effective coach. So that takes experience. That takes patience. You've got to learn that, and you've got to just keep practicing your coaching sessions, right?
Yeah, I would think also, like in some of these, in my experience, just in consulting, some of these are difficult to do depending on the way that you're brought in as a consultant. If you're brought in as a consultant to an organization, like let's use a Big 4 financial firm, like it's difficult to be a mentor at a Big 4 financial firm, because being a mentor means you need to get close to people and you need to work a lot one-on-one and help people and kind of align on your thinking and stuff like that. And that's hard when everyone's kind of out for themselves in a culture of fear, and it's hard to make that connection. I mean, it'd be much easier to just be a trainer and be like, hey, I've trained this person. Let me check a box to say the person's been trained. I don't know why they're not getting it. They've been trained,
Yeah, I think Fred touched on that when he was here. It's so much easier to be a trainer. You train people and give them their certs and say, there you go, right? Good luck out there. I think to your point about it being difficult in several environments, I mean, definitely, the bigger the company, the harder it is these days. So I think there are pockets. If you're talking about agile coaching, there are pockets where you can be quite effective being a mentor. I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. If you're brought in to make a difference in, say, the DevOps environment, you might be quite effective being able to mentor people there, right? Because you bring the expertise. If you're brought in as a coach, for example, on agile teams, depending on the culture of the organization, it might be hard, right? Because the culture is typically one of a PMO structure where everything is, this is how you do things, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very solid structure. Mm-hmm. You can't deviate from that. Every team shall follow these 8 steps or whatever it is.
Yeah.
In that environment, to try and suggest anything that's alternative, you really have to make a compelling case.
Yeah.
And now there are 2 ways to go here, right? You can fight the hard fight, and you usually come out with a few teeth missing, but and I speak from experience. Or you can say, I'm just going to fly under the radar. You want me to check those boxes with those 8 steps? I'll do that. But what I'm really doing on the ground is what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And that is quite effective. This clandestine, stealth kind of agile approach. Mm-hmm. Again, depending on the team you have, though, right? So if often the team you have is a smorgasbord of people from all different environments. In terms of agility, they're all over the map.
Yeah.
And in that scenario, if you have experienced people on the team, you feel like, well, maybe I should be coaching them, right? But then you have very inexperienced people on your team as well, junior people.
Yeah.
You feel like you should be mentoring. So to walk that balance, that's difficult, right? And you just have to take a position, stand behind it, and see how it goes. And I go back to my experimentation mind, right? Just try it. If it doesn't work this sprint, I'm going to switch it out.
I feel like there are certain elements of being a coach that lend itself to being aligned at different levels in the organization, like lean, like a leader in lean philosophy. Like you're not really going to be aligned at a team. I mean, I guess you could be aligned at a team level, but I think you'd be more effective the higher in the organization that you're aligned, being a lean leader.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the circumstance, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Probably. I mean, I guess that's probably not true. I mean, if you were aligned as a scrum master, you'd have influence on your product owner on the team to say, are we working on the most valuable things? And you keep kind of hammering at that. I could make the same argument probably for the change agent. If you're aligned higher in the organization as a change agent, you can do more damage. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I get where you're coming from. So if you're working in an environment, say like lean portfolio management, you would be working at a higher level than just teams initially anyway, right?
Yeah.
As you're mapping out the value streams and so forth. So in that scenario, in that sense, yes. But ultimately, the teams have to still buy into the approach, right? And it's your job to kind of make sure that happens. Yeah. So I think it can run the gamut. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kind of all these require a bit of facilitation skill. In addition, a counselor is also on the list. A counselor is a kind of a crappy description of what it is because it's like halfway between coach and mentor. It's like a team psychologist. That's really what it is. On the podcast with Mike Miller, he kind of said that. He was like, we're sort of, we don't really have psychology degrees, but we're sort of like the person carrying the torch.
It's funny you should say that because I've heard this argument that, coaches are therapists.
Yeah.
But my contrarian position is, no, they're not. We're not providing therapy.
No, yeah.
Right? That's not our role. Our role is to basically lead the coachee or the team, through a process where they can think through the alternatives in a clear way, sure. Right? And largely that happens by asking questions, mm-hmm. And making sure that they're encouraged to think through every alternative mm-hmm. without bias. There's nowhere in there that we're providing any kind of therapy. So I don't agree with that.
Well, you're being a safe person to talk to. You're providing a safe space for people to talk to and vent, maybe outside of their chain of command or whatever. If you're not, assuming we're all permanent employees and the team members don't actually work for me or whatever. If I'm a scaled Scrum Master, maybe the other Scrum Masters in the program report to me. Maybe I hired them, and then in that case, I actually would be their manager and would be the safe person representing the safe workspace for them to to talk about and vent and stuff like that. I don't know. At that point, you're being a good manager, so I don't know how well. I don't know if I'm backing up your point or arguing against it at this point. Both? I'm doing both.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm doing both. Being able to deploy those one-on-one skills is part of the counselor's job. That's what I think. Counselor on this list of elements of an Agile coach, that's what I attribute to the counselor role, is being able to talk to people one-on-one and be effective in your one-on-one feedback and your two-way communication.
So being a counselor, that's one thing, right? Because you are still helping them lead through their thinking and their thought process. What you're not doing is providing therapy, though. They're not on the therapy couch where you're actually providing them anything, a solution, for instance. They have to find their own. And whatever that ends up being, because you don't know. You're not really steering them towards any specific option there.
Yeah. I mean, I've been on teams where people are going through divorces or people are having personal problems. I wrote a blog about this a while ago. Again, I wrote a blog about a lot of stuff, but none of it got posted ever. This was one of the things is like we just don't have time to talk about, like, people are going through personal things. It's affecting their work. Somebody's got to talk to them because they're on a team. Who is that person? Is it a team lead? Is it a supervisor? Is it a scrum master? I would probably say if I was in a leadership position, I would probably be like, the scrum master should probably take the initial, shot at, hey, what's going on? Anything we can help with? What can the company do? I'd kind of shuffle that onto the scrum master.
Well, the scrum master is the closest to these individuals, so I think it makes sense for it to start there. But again, depending on the organizational culture, it may go from there to the person's manager or to HR, depending on the situation right? So there's no kind of one-size-fits-all type of thing here, right? But definitely the scrum master should reach out and just ask. Just ask and offer, right? How they can help.
Yeah. The only thing on here that I had that we didn't really specifically talk about was, well, there's two things. There's other ways to give feedback other than what we've been talking about, one-on-one coaching, that kind of stuff, other ways to give feedback. I think about other ways to give feedback. I think about times when the team has had to confront somebody. You ever been in that situation where the team has to confront somebody? That's uncomfortable. It's
very uncomfortable. And it's typically either another team, if you're in that program type of environment, right? Yeah. Or it's leadership.
Yeah. Right.
I've had that kind of experience where on my team I had very strong technical leaders, architects, for example, and they just simply don't see eye to eye with what the business leadership is looking for. But they don't have the skills to necessarily talk on the same level. So that's where this confrontation creeps in. Yeah. They're saying no directly as opposed to let's just talk this through and figure out how we can meet that. Right. So I have come across that scenario. And in those cases, you're a mediator at that point, right? Yeah. So what you're trying to do is tell the business that you're not saying no. That your teams are not saying no. What they're saying is, and I hate to use this term even, but yes and. But often it's not really yes and, it's often yes, but wait. And I'm still using the but word in there, but yes, but wait. We have these other ways that we can provide what you're looking for, but you may have to give here, you get more here. Yeah. It's that negotiation. Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes technical folks don't have the wherewithal to have that with business folks. Right. And that's where you kind of mediate.
Yeah, I'd kick into that one to say whenever I've had those kind of back and forths, it's leadership has already decided something. And they've kind of come to the team, or when the team comes to them, or they've come to the team. It doesn't really matter which way it is. Leadership has already decided something, and their mind's already set. So you're trying to talk them out of the mindset they've already kind of concreted in place, which is much harder than talking to someone who is on a team level, or like talking from team to team. You already have sort of like a expectation that like my ideas are somehow separate from me, and therefore like my ideas are like objects. They are not my identity. My ideas are like objects, like, oh, I like that object. Oh, I like this pen. This pen's a good pen. But let's talk about ways that it could be a bad pen. And maybe over the course of the conversation, you'll convince me that maybe there's a better pen than this, or maybe there's maybe there's not the best pen. But when I'm in management and you're talking about my ideas or whatever, now you're attacking my personality. So now it's personal. And you really need an expert facilitator at that point to kind of navigate you through those very, very rocky
yeah, absolutely. So when the conversation or the contention, I guess, is between two teams. Yeah. at least they have a common language, right?
Right.
It's technical.
Yeah.
But when it's the other way, when it's leadership, business, right, and technology, you don't have a common language.
Right.
And I think as a mediator, one of the things you would do is to listen, right, to your tech folks and translate that into terms that business can understand, right? Impact on the business in terms of cost, for instance, or time, right? Is it going to cost them more time? Is it going to cost them more dollars? Is it going to save them time, save them dollars? What does it mean? And then over the top of that would be, any pains, anything new they have to do, that these are additional steps. I guess that falls into the time as well. But, if you can translate what the tech folks are saying into those terms and back again, right? So when they say something like, that's going to cost another 15 minutes in our process, you come back to your tech folks and say, can we improve the throughput on this in some way, right? It's that kind of mediation, I think, that's needed there.
Yeah, that was I believe, again, the counselor or coach or consultant, like one of those falls into that. I'm not exactly sure which category that falls into, but you definitely need someone who can establish themselves as like the feeling of fair and impartial. I don't know. We probably have gone way off off the beaten trail with where we're going with this one, but teams run into that all the time. I remember when I was on teams, we ran into that all the time, especially with leadership, where they want some kind of goal and then they want to be involved in how it happens, and then you start getting stuck in exactly what you're talking about. You start getting stuck in, start questioning things, and I feel rather than questioning the goal or the outcome, you're questioning me, the person, and you really need an expert facilitator in a room to say, let's bring it back to the goal. Let's kind of focus on what we're talking about here and get it off of being directed at or anyone feeling like you're being personally attacked.
Absolutely, yeah. And it takes conscious effort on the part of the coach, right, to make sure that you're promoting an environment there where you're tackling the problem, not the person. Right?
Yeah. Well, this is Agile Coaching Part 2. We're gonna wrap up Agile Coaching Part 2
just
right now.
The lights go out.
Yeah, just before the lights go out. And who knows, man? I think maybe if we revisit this topic, from the perspective of that competency matrix from each individual item on that competence. Maybe we can do a session walking through each individual competent. But I feel like Part 1 and Part 2, like we've beaten it up enough for now.
Absolutely. I'd love to delve more into that matrix.
All right. So if you enjoyed this session, please like and subscribe.
Give us your comments down below. Should we use thumbs down? Should I? Down below.
Comment down below.
Let us know which topics you're interested in, and we'll be happy to oblige.
Unless they're Taylorism.
Well, we can oblige on Taylorism too.
Oh man, you want to do a whole podcast on Taylorism?
Maybe not the whole podcast.
We should do a whole session. We should do a whole session and just beat it into the ground, and then we'll be done with it. We'll be like, we had a session on this. Go watch it, and then we don't never have to talk about it again.
Right.